My name is Holly Shippers, and I am 19 years old. That fact alone feels strange to say out loud because for most of my life, I never truly felt like someone's child, not in the way people usually mean it. I was born into a family that never really wanted me, and although no one ever sat me down and said those words directly when I was young, I learned the truth through silence, distance, and absence. My parents never dreamed of having children. They were deeply in love with their freedom, the kind of people who planned trips on a whim, stayed out late without worrying about bedtime routines, and built their entire identity around living unencumbered lives. A baby didn't fit into that picture, especially not for my father. My dad was always very firm about it. He didn't want kids. Not someday, not maybe, just never. He believed having a child should come from genuine desire, not obligation or fear of regret. He used to say bringing a child into the world without wanting them was selfish. Ironically, that belief never stopped him from doing exactly that. My mom went along with his mindset for years, or at least she told herself she did. But as time passed, her friends started settling down, having babies, posting pictures of birthday parties and family holidays. She watched her younger sister become a mother. Slowly, something in her cracked. She started talking about how she didn't want to look back one day and feel like she'd missed out on something important. That's when the arguments started. They fought constantly. Even now, I don't know how long it went on. Weeks, months, maybe longer. I just know that my mom felt torn between social expectations and her own uncertainty, while my dad felt cornered into a life he never agreed to. Every conversation turned into a battle. Every disagreement ended in slammed doors and cold silence. Eventually, my father gave in, not because he changed his mind, not because he suddenly wanted a child, but because he was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of the tension, tired of being the villain. So he agreed, not out of love or excitement, but out of emotional exhaustion. And that is how I came into this world, born from compromise, not desire. The cruel irony is that the moment my mom actually became a mother, she realized something she hadn't expected. She hated it. She hated waking up at night to feed me. She hated the constant crying, the endless diapers, the way her life suddenly revolved around someone else. The reality of caring for a baby overwhelmed her completely, and instead of growing into the role or learning how to cope, she checked out. My dad didn't help at all, not once. So my mom did what she found easiest. She handed me off. I spent more time at my grandmother's house than I ever did with my parents. Sometimes it was just for the weekend. Other times it was for days, then weeks. Eventually, it stopped feeling temporary at all. My aunt, who already had 2 sons, became a second mother to me without hesitation. She had always wanted a daughter. I think that's why she loved me so fiercely. She made space for me in her life without ever making me feel like a burden. She helped with homework, brushed my hair, tucked me in at night. She showed up in ways my own parents never did. And my grandmother, she was everything. She fed me, bathed me, held me when I cried. She noticed when I was sick, remembered my favorite foods, and made sure I felt safe. To me, she wasn't just my grandmother. She was home. Meanwhile, my parents traveled like nothing had changed. Weeks would go by without them checking in. Months passed as if I didn't exist at all. At first, I missed them terribly. I used to write letters, my childish handwriting filling pages with hope. I told them I loved them. I told them I missed them. I begged them to come see me. They never wrote back. When they finally returned from their trips, they didn't rush to see me. Days would pass before my grandmother would lose patience and scold them for being neglectful. Only then would my mom show up, always with gifts in her hands, like toys or clothes could replace affection. I would get excited every time I saw her, but I could always tell by her expression. She never looked happy around me. Being with me felt like a chore she needed to finish so she could get back to her real life. My dad didn't even bother pretending. He never visited. If I tried to call him, there was always an excuse. At first I believed him. I told myself he was busy, that he wanted to talk but couldn't. But over time, the truth became impossible to ignore. He just didn't care. Eventually I stopped trying. For 10 years I lived like that, raised by my grandmother while my parents lived freely without me. And because that was all I knew, I thought it was normal. I thought that maybe this was just how families worked. Then everything changed. My grandmother was diagnosed with cancer. Suddenly, the one person who had always protected me was the one who needed help. She grew weaker. Treatments drained her. And for the first time in my life, she couldn't take care of me the way she always had. That's when my aunt stepped in and confronted my parents. She told them enough was enough, that my grandmother had done their job for a decade and now it was their turn. My father refused outright. He wanted nothing to do with me. My mother tried to push responsibility onto my aunt instead, making excuse after excuse. The fight that followed tore the family apart. Finally, my aunt made a threat she had never wanted to make. She told them that if they didn't take me in, she would report them to Child Protective Services. She meant it, and they knew it. That's when my parents took me back. Not because they wanted me, but because they were forced to. And from the moment I stepped into their house, I knew something deep in my bones. I wasn't their daughter. I was an obligation they resented. Living with my parents felt nothing like coming home. It wasn't loud or violent. There were no dramatic confrontations, no explosive arguments aimed directly at me. In some ways, that made it worse. The house was cold in a way that sank into your bones. Quiet, but not peaceful. Empty, but never calm. From the very first night, I understood the unspoken rule: don't take up space. My parents moved around me like I was a piece of furniture they hadn't chosen but were stuck with anyway. My mom avoided eye contact as much as possible. My dad barely acknowledged my presence at all. Meals were silent. Conversations, if they happened, were clipped and transactional. Did you eat? There's food in the fridge. Don't leave the lights on. That was the extent of our relationship. I learned quickly that asking for anything, even basic things, was a mistake, so I didn't. I handled everything myself. My grandmother had raised me to be independent long before this, partly because she knew she wouldn't always be around. I packed my own lunches, did my own laundry, walked myself to school. I never cried for attention, never threw tantrums, never complained. I thought if I was easy enough, quiet enough, good enough, maybe they wouldn't hate having me there so much. At school, I thrived. Teachers loved me. I got good grades, stayed out of trouble, and never missed assignments. Being a star student became my shield. If I couldn't be loved at home, at least I could be valued somewhere else. Every A felt like proof that I wasn't useless, that I wasn't a burden. At home, I tried to help whenever I could. I washed dishes alongside my mom, even though she rarely spoke to me while we worked. I helped my dad with the lawn, raking leaves and pulling weeds in silence while he pretended I wasn't there. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to realize I wasn't some helpless child ruining their lives. But nothing changed. My dad refused to spend money on anything beyond the bare minimum. When I asked about joining extracurricular activities, clubs, sports, anything, he shut it down immediately. It didn't matter how educational or beneficial it was. He didn't want to pay for me. My mom didn't even ask about my day. She didn't check if I made it home safely from school. She didn't care if I ate dinner. She never asked how I was feeling. Most days it felt like I was invisible to her. And then there were the trips. My parents never stopped traveling. If anything, they traveled more. They would stock the fridge with groceries, leave some cash on the counter, and disappear for days at a time, sometimes a week. Once, nearly 2. I was still a kid, but they had no problem leaving me alone in that empty house, trusting that I would figure it out. And I did. I learned how to cook simple meals, how to lock doors at night, how to sit in silence without breaking. The loneliness was crushing. The house felt enormous when it was empty. Every sound echoed. Every night stretched endlessly. I missed my grandmother more than I could put into words. Even while battling cancer, she called me regularly, just to hear my voice, just to make sure I was okay. She was the only one who reminded me that I mattered. My aunt helped when she could. She'd stop by with home-cooked meals, sit with me for a while, and make sure I was eating properly. She knew my parents weren't taking care of me. And even though she couldn't force them to be better, she did what she could to fill the gaps. By the time I was 15, I stopped thinking of my parents as parents at all. We weren't close, we weren't bonded, we were just 3 people sharing a roof. There was no warmth, no affection, no connection. They existed. I existed. That was it. Around that time, my dad's drinking got worse. He came home late, stumbling through the door, reeking of alcohol. Bottles started appearing in places they hadn't been before. The trash filled with empty cans. And soon after that came the gambling. It was like he was desperate to escape his life, even if it meant destroying it. His addictions only made things worse between him and my mom. Their arguments became louder, uglier, and impossible to ignore. They screamed at each other for hours. And somehow, every single time, it came back to me. My dad, drunk and bitter, would shout about how my birth had ruined his life, how I destroyed his marriage, how he could have been happy, and child-free if it weren't for me. My mom would scream back, saying she was tired of him throwing her mistake in her face, that she had already apologized enough for getting pregnant with me. I would sit in my room, hugging my knees, silently crying while they tore each other apart. Neither of them noticed. Then, on my 16th birthday, they finally said the quiet part out loud. They sat me down in the living room like it was some kind of family meeting. My dad avoided looking at me. My mom folded her arms tightly, already defensive. They told me they had decided to sell everything. The house, their belongings, their life here. They were moving out of the country. They said they couldn't be happy here anymore, that their marriage was falling apart. And somehow, shockingly, yet predictably, that I was the reason. My dad explained that he wanted to become a tour guide in Thailand. My mom said she couldn't imagine living without him, so she was going too. And just like that, they were leaving me behind. They talked about me moving back in with my grandmother permanently, as if I were just another thing to be handed off before they left. They said they'd leave some money with her for my care, like that made everything okay. I didn't know whether to scream or laugh. I didn't mind living with my grandmother, but I was sick of being passed around like an inconvenience. I told them how selfish they were being. Grandma had just recovered from cancer. She deserved peace, not another round of parenting. My dad dismissed it instantly. He said I was a big girl now, that living with Grandma would be good because I could help take care of her. That was it. No apology, no hesitation, no regret. Just relief. And as I packed my things, I realized something that terrified me with its clarity. They weren't abandoning me for the first time. They were just finally being honest about it. By the time my parents left the country, I had already stopped crying over them. That realization didn't come all at once. It settled slowly, like dust after a door slams shut. I think part of me had known for years that this was how it would end, that one day they would choose themselves completely, without pretending anymore. Still, watching them do it hurt in a way I hadn't prepared for. They didn't argue with my aunt or my grandmother before they left. Not really. My grandmother tried, of course. She told them they were being cruel, that they had already failed me once and were doing it again. My aunt didn't hold back either. She called them selfish, shameless, and irresponsible. My parents listened with blank expressions. No guilt, no hesitation, no second thoughts. They were already gone in their minds. I moved back in with my grandmother just days after my 16th birthday. Her health had improved enough that she could manage daily life again, but she was still fragile. I hated that the burden of caring for me was falling on her once more. She never complained, not once, but I saw the exhaustion in her eyes. And I blamed my parents for every second of it. For the first time, though, I also felt something unexpected. Relief. Living with my grandmother again felt like stepping into warmth after years of cold. The house smelled like home-cooked meals and clean laundry. My aunt and cousins stopped by constantly, filling the rooms with noise and laughter. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe. For the first time in a long time, I felt wanted. My parents didn't call after they left. Not once. No check-ins. No updates. No, we made it safely. It was as if the ocean between us wasn't just physical, it was intentional. 2 years passed like that. I focused on school, threw myself into studying, and planned my escape the only way I knew how, through education. I earned a scholarship and moved into my college dorm shortly after graduating high school. It felt unreal, standing in a space that was mine, built on my own effort. I still visited my grandmother whenever I could. My aunt and cousins checked on me constantly, calling every weekend to make sure I was eating, sleeping, and keeping up with classes. My parents, meanwhile, stayed silent. They didn't show up for my graduation. My grandmother tried to contact them, hoping, naively, that they might care about such an important moment in my life. They didn't respond. Sometimes, out of morbid curiosity, I looked at my mom's social media. She posted pictures of her and my dad smiling on beaches, exploring new cities, living like a carefree, child-free couple. If you didn't know better, you'd never guess they had a daughter at all. I told myself I was done caring. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang. It was my mother. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, unable to move. She had never called me before, not when I was struggling, not when I was alone, not when I achieved something worth celebrating. And now? Now she wanted to talk? When I finally answered, her voice was casual, light, as if no time had passed at all. She told me she and my dad were back in town, that they wanted to see me. I asked her why. That simple question seemed to offend her. "What do you mean, why?" she snapped. "We're your parents. Can't we even see our own daughter?" I almost laughed. My parents? They had never acted like my parents. Not once. I told her that. I reminded her of everything, how they left me, how they ignored me, how they built a life without me in it. She brushed it all aside. She said they had realized how important it was to have a child, that after all these years, they were finally ready to be parents. That's when something inside me broke. Finally ready. I told her I wasn't interested, that if they had wanted to be parents, they should have done it when I was born, not now, after I had already learned how to survive without them. I hung up. The messages started almost immediately. Calls, voicemails, texts. She begged me to call her back, accusing me of being cruel and unreasonable. I didn't respond. When I told my grandmother what had happened, she was just as shocked as I was. She didn't even know my parents were back in town. That's when it hit me. People don't suddenly change after 19 years of neglect. They don't come back out of love. They come back because they need something. And whatever it was, I knew it couldn't be good. For 2 weeks after that first call, my phone felt like a ticking bomb. My mother didn't stop. She called in the mornings, in the afternoons, late at night. She left voicemails that swung wildly between forced sweetness and open resentment. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she scolded me, and sometimes she spoke to me like I was still a small child who didn't understand her own emotions. My father joined in soon after. The man who had never bothered to speak to me suddenly had a lot to say. He sent messages demanding to know why I was ignoring my mother. He called me disrespectful, ungrateful, rude. That was when my anger finally boiled over. They abandoned me. They erased me from their lives. And now somehow I was the villain for refusing to play along with their sudden interest? I knew then, without a doubt, that something was wrong. I called my aunt first. She didn't hesitate. She said exactly what I was thinking. They want something. When I told my grandmother, she went quiet for a long moment, then sighed in a way that told me she already feared the answer. We agreed on one thing immediately. I wouldn't face them alone. If my parents wanted to talk, they would have to face all of us, and the truth they had spent years avoiding. We chose a cafe near my college campus, neutral ground, public, safe. I texted my mother the details and told her the time. I didn't mention that my grandmother and aunt would be with me. When we arrived, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I hadn't seen my parents in years. Part of me still expected them to look exactly the same. They didn't. They walked in together, scanning the room until they spotted me, and then they froze. The shock on their faces when they saw my grandmother and aunt sitting beside me was unmistakable. They had expected me alone, vulnerable. My dad looked wrong, thinner, paler, older than I remembered. His movements were slow, his posture slightly hunched. For the first time in my life, he looked weak, sick. My mom tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She greeted me like we were distant relatives meeting at a holiday dinner. Awkward, forced, unnatural. I didn't waste time. "What do you want from me?" I asked. The question landed hard. At first, they danced around it. They said they missed me, that they wanted to see how I was doing, that they regretted how things turned out. I didn't let them hide. I pressed, over and over. And finally, my dad cracked. He told us he had kidney failure. He explained that he had been getting treatment while they were living abroad, but his condition had worsened. He needed better medical care. He needed help. My mom jumped in quickly, explaining how their savings were gone, how medical bills had drained their retirement fund, how they were barely getting by. Then she said the words that changed everything. She wanted me to move back in with them. She wanted me to get a part-time job. And she wanted me to help pay for my father's treatment. I felt numb. And then came the real reason they were there. She asked me to get tested, to see if I was a match to donate a kidney. The cafe felt too small, too loud, too bright. After everything they had done, after years of neglect, abandonment, and cruelty, they were asking me to give up a part of my body for the man who never wanted me to exist. I couldn't breathe. Before I could say anything, my grandmother spoke. Her voice shook with fury as she reminded them of everything they had done, of how they left me, ignored me, failed me. She told them they didn't know a single thing about who I had become. My aunt didn't hold back either. She called them shameless, disgusting, unfit to even ask. That's when my mother snapped. She said she always regretted having me, but now at least, my life could finally be useful. I felt sick. She asked if that wasn't the point of having children, to sacrifice for their parents, to help them when they needed it. That was it. I looked at my parents and told them no. I told them my body didn't belong to them, that giving birth to me didn't give them ownership over my life. I reminded them that they had lived happily without me for years, and now they could continue doing so. My father started crying, or at least pretending to. He begged. He said I was his only chance. that if I refused, his death would be on my conscience. He even promised that he would finally be my father if I helped him. Too little, too late. We walked out together. And as the door closed behind us, I knew this chapter of my life was ending. I thought walking out of that cafe would be the end of it. I was wrong. The messages started again that same night. My phone buzzed nonstop on the desk in my dorm room, lighting up the dark like a warning signal. Missed calls, voicemails, texts layered on top of each other so quickly I couldn't read them fast enough. My mother's voice messages were the worst. At first, she tried to sound calm, reasonable, even. She said I was being emotional, that I needed to think logically, that family helped each other, especially in times of crisis. Then her tone shifted. She accused me of being heartless, cold, ungrateful. She said she didn't raise me to abandon people. I almost laughed when I heard that. My father sent messages too, long, rambling paragraphs filled with guilt and desperation. He said he didn't have anyone else, no siblings, no parents willing to help him. He said I was his only hope, that without me, he would die. He told me I would regret it for the rest of my life if I didn't help him. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed with my grandmother instead. My aunt insisted. She was afraid my parents might show up at my dorm, corner me, pressure me again. I hated that it had come to this, that even as an adult, I needed protection from the people who were supposed to protect me. The next day, my mother crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She showed up at my grandmother's house. I wasn't home yet when it happened. My aunt called me, her voice tight with rage, and told me my mother had been screaming in the front yard. She accused my grandmother of poisoning me against them, of stealing me, of turning me into a selfish, ungrateful daughter. My grandmother told her to leave. My mother refused. She shouted that I owed them, that my existence had cost them everything, that if my father died, it would be my fault. When I got there, my aunt had already forced her to go, but the damage was done. Something inside me hardened. I blocked both of my parents on everything that same day. Phone, social media, email, everything. I didn't want to hear another word. I didn't want to be pulled back into their chaos, their desperation, their manipulation. Still, the guilt crept in. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I would lie awake and think about my father's face in that cafe. How thin he looked, how weak. I hated him for everything he'd done to me, but I didn't want him to die. That truth made me angry. Why did I still care, even after everything? My aunt reminded me gently that compassion didn't mean obligation. That feeling bad didn't mean I was wrong. That refusing to sacrifice my body didn't make me cruel. It made me human. My grandmother said something that stayed with me. She told me that parents are supposed to protect their children, not consume them. That love isn't proven through suffering. And that no one is entitled to another person's body, no matter what. I held on to those words. Weeks passed, then months. The silence from my parents became permanent. I focused on school again, on building a future that didn't include them. I laughed with my cousins, cooked with my aunt, sat beside my grandmother in the evenings, holding her hand, grateful that this was what family was supposed to feel like. Almost 7 months after the confrontation, my aunt called me one morning. My father had died. I didn't cry. I didn't feel relief either. Just emptiness. I told her I wouldn't be attending the funeral. She understood. My grandmother went. My aunt went. They said it was about closure for them, not for me. I stayed home. I sat on my bed and thought about the man who was technically my father, but never really had been. A man who blamed me for his misery, who only remembered I existed when he needed something from me. I knew my mother would blame me for his death. In her mind, I always would. But I also knew something else, something I had never known before. None of this was my fault. I didn't ruin their lives. I didn't owe them my body. And I didn't need their approval to move forward. For the first time, I felt truly free. It's strange how death is supposed to feel final, like a full stop at the end of a sentence. But when my father died, it didn't feel like an ending at all. It felt more like a chapter that had never really begun, finally closing on its own. The funeral happened on a gray morning. My grandmother went. My aunt went. They didn't pressure me to come, didn't guilt me, didn't even suggest it might help. They knew better. They knew that funerals are for people who are mourning a relationship, not an idea. And I wasn't mourning a father. I stayed in my dorm room that day, watching students walk past my window, laughing, rushing to class, living lives untouched by the kind of family silence that had shaped mine. I expected to feel something dramatic, grief, regret, relief, anger. Instead, I felt hollow. I tried to remember a moment where my dad had held my hand, or asked about my dreams, or protected me when I was scared. Nothing came. Just fragments of shouting, slammed doors, empty stares, and words that cut deeper than he probably ever understood. It felt wrong to call him my father. He was a man who shared my DNA, nothing more. My mother tried to reach out after his death. She used a new number, left a voicemail I never listened to. My aunt told me later that she blamed me openly, told extended family that if I had helped, he'd still be alive, that I had chosen revenge over family. I didn't correct the story. People who believed that version of events were never going to understand mine anyway. What surprised me most was how little guilt I felt once time passed. I had spent my entire childhood feeling responsible for things that were never my fault. My parents' unhappiness, their resentment, their failures. Saying no to them had been the first truly selfish thing I had ever done. And it saved me. I stayed blocked. I stayed distant. I stayed firm. Life didn't magically become perfect after that, but it became quieter, lighter. I focused on my studies, kept my scholarship, started planning a future that felt like it actually belonged to me. I spent weekends with my aunt's family, listened to my grandmother tell stories from her youth, learned what love looked like when it wasn't conditional. Sometimes, late at night, I still wonder what kind of person I might have been if my parents had wanted me, if they had loved me without resentment, if my childhood had been filled with warmth instead of endurance. But those questions don't haunt me anymore. Because I also know this: I survived. I built myself. I learned where love lives and where it doesn't. My parents made their choices long before I ever made mine. And for the first time in my life, I'm at peace with that.